Today on the Metal Roofing channel, we are talking about metal shingles versus standing seam metal roofing. What's up, guys? Welcome to the Metal Roofing channel and welcome to Q&A Mondays. It's a great day here on the channel. All the questions we're going to be talking about today are below in the description. Subscribe if you're new here. We'd love to have you. Today we are with Todd Miller, president of Isaiah Industries. Todd, it's so great to have you on the channel today. Thank you so much for being here.
Fantastic. Thank you. I love what you guys do and am thrilled to be a part of it.
So we're here in Piqua, Ohio, and we're going to be talking about metal shingles, also known as stamped metal roofing, versus standing seam metal roofing. We got Adam Mazzella from Sheffield Metals here as well. So let's jump into it. First of all, let's talk about some similarities, and you guys can kind of help fill me in on some similarities between stamped metal roofing and standing seam metal roofing.
Sure. Well, I think there are a lot of similarities because you can get very similar metals. Both standing seam and metal shingles are generally available in aluminum or steel. You can also get exotic metals in both, like copper and zinc. Typically, the coatings that are used on both standing seam and metal shingles are both the higher grade PVDF type finishes.
Right.
We see a lot of those being used. And so I think there's a lot of similarities in that they give property owners the benefit of being able to choose what sort of look they'd like on their building. So they can get very similar long-term benefits, but very different, very different looks, I guess I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Some other similarities with stamped metal shingles and standing seam are a lot of the test methods. So with a standing seam roof, to understand how that roof's going to perform in an uplift situation, you are going to do a UL 90 similar to that. And then you're also going to take it to ultimate failure with the UL 1897. So when you're thinking about roof types, you're not going to see that in your standard shingle, but asphalt shingle, but with a metal shingle and a standing seam roof, you will.
So what type of attachment do we see between standing seam and metal shingles? What type of similarities are there?
A lot of similarities. Of course, standing seam by definition has concealed fasteners or hidden fasteners, so you don't have all these screw heads and things exposed on the roof. Most of the metal shingles are very similar. So normally what we've done is we've designed them so that they also have concealed fasteners. So an example here would be on this panel, which is an aluminum panel. We would be putting a fastener through here that then would get covered by the next course of shingles. And then they also would have one or two clips, a lot depending upon the wind uplift that's required. They would have clips over here that would also then fasten down to the roof deck. But again, at the end of the day, all the fasteners are concealed, so
Right.
You don't have these exposed fasteners. So again, it kind of goes back to that whole basic idea. You can get a lot of the same features and benefits out of standing seam and the metal shingles, but very different looks.
Another similarity between stamped metal shingles and standing seam metal roofs is flashing. So a lot of the flashings are the same. When you look at your E flashings, you're going to have your typical D-style drip edge. A lot of the valley concepts are very similar as well. And where you start to see some variation really has to do with the varying profiles of a stamped metal shingle. Where on a standing seam metal roof with a hip and a ridge, you're almost exclusively going to see a Z flashing. With stamped metal shingle, it's really going to be based on how you flash it is going to be based on the profile that you're manufacturing or installing.
Yeah, that's very true. A lot of folks will hear about metal shingles and they'll start to think, well, it'll probably flash a lot like asphalt shingles. So they start thinking about things like step flashings and things like that. But we use the same lineal type flashings that we do with standing seam. Big difference, though, like you said, is a lot of times we're using Z closures, big boxy flashings on standing seam because that's what you got to do to accommodate the height of the seam. Mm-hmm. These products, of course, being lower profile, allow us to have flashing details that, for example, for a shake roof, make that roof look like wood shakes on the gable end, or for a slate look roof, it makes that roof look like slate on the ends. So one of the details that we have gone toward a lot, and any contractor out there that's ever run into this knows that a nightmare can be what I call flared gables, where the ridge of the roof is wider than it is at the eave. And that can be a real nightmare for how you handle those gables with long vertical seam panels. You know, do you cut them off? Do you try to hem them and then risk put oil canning in them? All those types of problems. With these products, we literally bring every course out to the edge of the gable, and we'll have a gable channel that runs up the gable, and the course of every or the ends of every course of shingles is folded down into that gable channel. So again, on a shake look, which might have an inch and a half profile, that gives us that stair-step look down the gable. So it looks like you're just looking into the end of a shake roof. And yet everything flows off the roof, and we aren't trapping anything on those flared gables. And that can be used on standard gables too, not just flared ones.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to lead into some dissimilarities between standing seam and stamped metal roofing as we talk about installation similarities and differences. What other things are different about the two types?
You know, I think that one of the things that oftentimes has to come up is, you know, you always have pipe penetrations through a roof.
Yep.
And standing seam, a lot of times we're doing flush-mounted pipe flashings, deck-mounted type flashings. Metal shingles, on the other hand, pipe penetrations are handled very similar to asphalt shingles because, again, you've got these horizontal courses where you're able to work your pipe flashing in, have it go in between the courses, and it's a whole lot easier. Now, that said, it's kind of interesting. A lot of times folks will ask me, you know, overall, what's easier to install, standing seam or metal shingle? And one of the things I always say is, okay, if a crew learned metal by installing standing seam, they're going to probably prefer to install standing seam. If they learned metal by installing metal shingles, they're probably going to prefer to install metal shingles. So that's always been interesting for me over the years. But, you know, generally speaking, the amount of time, the amount of work involved is very, very similar. But like, you know, you talk a lot about, it requires a craftsman. It requires someone who cares about what they're doing, someone that knows how to bend flashings and do things when they need to do.
So when it comes to metal thicknesses, what kind of differences or maybe similarities do we see there?
Sure. So typically with a stamped product, and these are made in a stamping process, typically we will see these made from thinner metals. And the reason being that when we stamp it, we put a great deal of strength into the metal with the forming and the deep folds and the texturing and that type of thing. So historically, for a standing seam, of course, aluminum is usually 032, 32 thousandths or 40 thousandths. Typically, our products in the aluminum are either 19 or 24 thousandths, so they are thinner gauge metal. Typically in the steel products, our products are typically around 15 to 16 thousandths compared to your steel standing seam, which can be from 24 to 24 thousandths, or gauge in that case, a 24 gauge. So we're dealing with a little bit thinner metal, but the forming and the texturing puts a great deal of strength into the product. An interesting option also on a lot of metal shingles today. So right here I have an aluminum shingle that interlocks on all four sides. An option here would be a foam insert behind the panel. So normally you would have this hollow space behind the panel. You can fill that up with a high density EPS or styrofoam insert in order to give great deal of rigidity and walkability to this product, even though it does have an air gap behind it.
Very cool.
One of the differences, though, is a lot of times with standing seam, you know, you're dealing with pitch-specific flashings because of the gauges of the metal. It's very hard to bend those heavier metals out in the field. And likewise, you can't just go with a standard generic pitch and have it work on everything.
Yeah.
Most of the metal shingles, because we're dealing with lighter gauge metals, are using a generically pitched flashing. So it does not have to be pitch specific. Likewise, if they do have to do any field fabrication, a lot of times the crews will have a portable handbrake on the job, and they can find themselves able to custom bend flashings as well. But one of the things you will find with most of the metal shingles is they do have preformed flashings, so that a lot of times jobs go up without any job site flashing or bending,
Now, you mentioned the pitch-specific things. How low of a slope can stamped metal shingles go down to?
Good question and good contrast to standing seam. So most of the metal shingles available today require at least a 312 roof pitch.
Okay.
Anything less than that would not be supported by the manufacturer.
Okay, and so that's by and large kind of our rule of thumb with snap lock systems.
Sure.
You know, you get into a mechanical seam system, depending on the environment, geography, things like that, we can go down to real low slopes, half 12, or you know, really anywhere up from there.
So as we're talking about installation, what types of decking do we see stamped metal versus standing seam go over?
Sure. So most of the testing that's been done has been done on nominal half-inch decking, so either CDX or OSB. That said, it's kind of interesting. Obviously, we know that if you look at the residential roofing market in general in any given year, typically 80, 85, 90% of it is re-roofing. So new construction, even in a good new construction year, is still a pretty small part of the roofing market. So we're doing a lot of re-roofing, and what we will find a lot of times is folks will go over the old shingles. So the low weight of the metal shingle encourages going over the old shingles. But the other thing is, again, when you're dealing with these panels and their formed thickness, if you can look at this panel, you can imagine that up here, this being the uphill side, it's resting close to the roof deck. Actually, those deep grooves, I'll kind of hold it up so our viewers can see, those deep grooves actually keep almost all of the panel up off the roof deck. And then this would be locking in up here. So what that airspace does is it allows you a great deal of forgiveness if those old shingles are cupped or curled or cracked or whatever. This, by creating a dead airspace over it, creates a whole lot of forgiveness for the unevenness of those old shingles. And that can be a real plus. And, you know, one of the things I always look at it for homeowners is if they can avoid tearing off that old roof and putting in a landfill and those expenses, you know, they can invest a little bit more in a better roof that way because they save some money in some other areas.
Yeah, and another nice thing about this, where standing seam, you know, that oftentimes only looks as good as the roof deck underneath it. You know, with the ridges and the basically the groove and the pattern that you guys are putting in here, you're going to conceal a lot of that uneven deck or that oil canning that really can come through in a flat standing seam panel.
Yeah. I remember one homeowner had bought a metal shingle once, and he had a pretty bad swale over his front porch. And you know, I was talking with him and the contractor and said, you know, that's going to show with the metal shingle. I said, you may want to address that. And he said, I really don't want to have to mess with it, so we'll just install over it. After the roof was done, he contacted me. He said, Todd, you won't believe this, but you can't see that swale over my porch anymore. So I can't guarantee those results all the time, but
Right.
It worked that time.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we covered a lot between the differences between stamped metal roofing and standing seam metal roofing. If you have any questions, please comment down below. We'd love to hear from you. Make sure you subscribe to the Metal Roofing channel. Todd, thanks so much. Really appreciate you being on the channel today.
you.
Thanks, Todd.
Check out the other videos we have with Todd. A lot of great information on stamped metal roofing and metal roofing in general that you should check out. Catch you again next time.